Well, good morning. It's great to see all of your smiling faces in here while it's all nice and dark and gloomy out there. Today, before I jump into the message, I need to remind us about something that's coming up. Next week, we'll begin a new sermon series that kind of tracks with Advent, which is those 4 weeks that take us up to Christmas. And if you remember, I talked about just a couple of weeks ago that during this series, we're going to be challenged toward acts of generosity in sort of a couple of different directions. One, we want to focus locally within kind of our own circle of influence and those people who are around us, maybe in our neighborhood or work or whatever, by doing things that share the love of Christ with them in any way that we possibly can. And it doesn't necessarily have to be money that we use to make that investment. It can be our own time and energy. And just doing something kind, raking the leaves in their yard, or going over and maybe baking a pie, or doing something for somebody else here in this place that we live in. So that's one direction that we're going to be challenged toward this place of generosity. And then the other one is with our partner community over in Buloba, Uganda. And we talked a little bit about that medical clinic that we believe God has sort of placed right in front of us, a vision to see a medical clinic built right there in Buloba. And for years, ever since we started going there, we felt like that was always part of the vision, but it's also always been a missing piece because we didn't have the resources and we didn't have the place. But now that Africa Renewal University exists right down the road from the church that we partner with, they have the space. And so this vision is laid before us to help them get this off the ground. And so we're very excited about the opportunity, what this will mean for the people in that community. It will be community changing and life changing in many ways. Before I go any further though, they have sent us another video just kind of talking about what a clinic would mean for them. And so let's go ahead and run that and then I'll talk about it on the other side.
Hello, my name is Kisembo Christine, Finance Assistant at Africa Renewal University. I get a lot of complaints from students as a finance assistant that they don't have money for transport, they don't have money for their medical treatment, and they want the school to provide for that, which we can't do because we have growing numbers every now and then. So with the medical center in Africa Renewal University, we shall help to solve some of those problems like transport and then the medical treatment.
I am Mark Malinga. I'm a lecturer at Africa Renewal University. I'm also an associate pastor with the Buloba Community Church. And I'm so happy that there is a suggestion for you to bring a medical facility at Africa Renewal University. It's gonna be helpful to us, especially our students who stay on campus, whereby we don't have means to transport them to distant facility. But this one within the campus, it will be so helpful. It will be so helpful also to the community, even the children with the Buloba Community Church project. They have many children, and to be helpful to them. We have many children in this community, we have many women in this community, and opening up the community, it will be showing the love of Christ to the community. My prayer is that this facility shall not compete with other facilities distant from us, but will be here to show the love of Christ to the people.
Hello, my name is Jackie, a student at Africa Renewal University. I believe we really need a medical center around the school because in the middle of the night, some students get sick and it's hard for them to go to further stations. And it's also a bit expensive. So I believe it would benefit all of us if we have a clinic in the school.
My name is Vincent Byamkama. I am the registrar at Africa Renewal University. It's really important for us to have a medical facility here at African University, not only for the staff and the students of African University, but also for the community. Personally, I have 2 young children, Ethan and Emmeline, and then my wife Grace. We are always at the medical center every month, at least once in a month. But the nearest medical center is really very far from where we live, so it is very costly, very expensive, but also they do not give what we call the best medical attention that we deserve. So having it here within the campus, it will not only be helpful to the campus, but also to the community, to families with young children who are always vulnerable to the sicknesses, to the malaria, to the infections within the community. We'll be grateful to have it here. Thank you.
Okay, so as you can see, it's a very real issue in that community, and oftentimes it's an issue of life and death as to whether someone gets medical attention or not there. And so it's a great opportunity for us to come together to help see this happen. So as I mentioned before, there's kind of like a base goal of about $25,000. That gets the clinic up and running and gets a nurse hired and some resources there to be able to get it started. The top end of this is going to be over $200,000. That would be to construct the clinic and have everything that it needs to fully function. And so as I mentioned, we could, if we did like $30 a family or an individual, kind of like we did with the food boxes for the food bank last year, if everybody did that, we would easily reach the minimum goal. But I don't want to put out a number there. I just want you to pray and see where God leads you to give. And just let him guide you to that place, and just see what happens there. December 14th is the give day, so don't do that today. Just wait, and we're going to bring this together as one unified body on December 14th and give that. Now, if you know you're not going to be here on the 14th, you can certainly give before then, and that's not a problem. But just want you to be thinking about that. And we're telling you this ahead of time, again, just so that we know how the holidays are and finances and all that kind of stuff, so that you can sort of be prepared to be a part of this. So anyway, there you go. You'll be hearing more about it. Information is on the website if you want to go there and get more details. Okay, today we're going to wrap up this series called the Sermon on the Mount that we've been in for several weeks. Jesus' kind of first sermon series that he preached, laying this whole idea of life in the kingdom out for us, kind of giving us the expectation of what does it look like to be a true disciple, what does it look like to be a follower, and how do we do that well. And so that's where we have been. And this morning we're going to be in Matthew 7, 24 through 29. These verses will wrap up that whole teaching of Jesus. So you can go there and kind of put your finger there, and as we've done every week, I'll come back to that in just a minute. But kind of let me redirect you right now to something else. So let me just get you to imagine. Imagine your house, or imagine a house that you've lived in, and if I were to ask you to describe that house to me, how would that go? What would you say to me about the house? So let me just kind of guess how this might go. You would say something like, well, you would start maybe with the style of house. It's a Tudor house, or it's colonial, or it's ranch style, or I don't know, it's a Dilworth house or something like that, whoever built that. You might talk about the shingles and their color. You might talk about the brick and the color of it. It's 2-story, it's 1-story. It's got 4 bedrooms, it's got 5 bedrooms. It's got this kind of a driveway. It's got this kind of landscaping. It sits on this square footage, right? So those are the kind of things. You would be giving me like a visual. You'd be like, here, now you can sort of see this house and you can sort of know what my house is like. So probably 9 out of 10 people, that's what they would do if you're going to describe that house to me. Now, probably what most people wouldn't do if I asked that same question, would start to describe it to me from the ground up. Most people wouldn't go, man, we have the most amazing foundation. It's solid concrete, it's gray. I mean, like a sweet tone of gray. It's 4 inches thick. It may be 5, I'm not sure, but I think it's 4. That's minimum, right? It's this big, It sits under the house, and it is awesome. Nobody is going to describe the house starting with the foundation and how amazing that thing is, right? But if I were to ask you, what is the most important part of the structure of a house, you would say it's the foundation, right? Because however the foundation goes is how the rest of the house is going to go. And will it be able to survive things like storms and all this kind of stuff? Will it survive time and you and your kids and everything else? Because if the foundation is not good, it's kind of silly to put a lot of effort and money into building the rest of it because it's probably not going to make it. So we can all agree that the foundation is very important when it comes to construction. Now, we also talk about foundations in many other areas of life. We use that same term to talk about things like our kids. We want a solid foundation for our kids, and usually we might apply that to like education, right? We say we want them to have a solid education because that's going to provide a firm foundation for them as they go through life and then, go get a job and get a career and all the things that they will do. And so many people move right here to Auburn because of the education, because you know why? Because they want their kids to have a solid foundation, and they'll do whatever it takes to make that happen. Or we might think of it in terms of just how we build up all these other worldly things in our life. Like we would say, we need a good financial foundation. So we want to make sure that we're investing our money in the right places and that we're saving enough. We have the right life insurance, and that we put it in the right annuities and all these kinds of things. So we have a good foundation financially for the rest of our life and when we retire. And so you see how we apply this in so many different ways. And you know, the Bible tells us that there's also this other place that we need to apply this idea, and that's just with our spiritual life. That we need to make sure that we're building a foundation on, building a life on the right foundation, especially spiritually. Jill Harris, who is the director of our Cornerstone Kids Ministry, and I were in a conversation this past week, and we were just talking about kids ministry, what's going on back there, and all these different things. And we sort of got on the concept of just how important children's ministry is. Now, all ministry is important, don't get me wrong. But I really believe that the best form of evangelism is to do the best job that we can with our kids. Teach them about God, teach them about Jesus, teach them this book. What does it mean to love God and love your neighbor? All these things. You know why? Because kids, maybe you'll agree with me on this, it just seems like kids get God better than we do when we're an adult. We haven't built up a lot of questions and barriers and problems and issues and all this kind of stuff. Kids are pretty open. As a kid, we get faith. We do faith. And we seem to connect in that way. And so it's like, you know, the way I think about it is we do a lot of investing with our kids' ministry because we're investing in this foundation spiritually for them that is very important. And, you know, it's like if you came to faith later on in life, I think you would say, man, it'd been so much better if I'd have gotten this when I was younger. You know, if I'd have really understood all these concepts and not goofed around with my life in this way. And that's just kind of the way it is, because there is this foundation that God is trying to build in us that's very important to how our life will go. Now, Jesus is talking about that here in these last verses, the value and the importance of getting this foundation correct. So let's go ahead and just jump in here and read this and then talk about it on the other side. Matthew 7, starting with verse 24, Jesus opens with the word, therefore. Now, whenever you see the word therefore, you have to ask the question, what is it there for? Okay, because what he's doing is that word is a connector to everything that he has said previously. So you might say everything he just said in the Sermon on the Mount is coming down to this. Here we go. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. All right, let me stop right there. Jesus is essentially telling us a little parable to make this point about our spiritual life and these foundations, and he takes these two builders and he compares and contrasts them. He's like, this is one guy, he's going to build a house. He builds it this way. That was not smart. There was this other guy, he builds a house this way. This was the way to go. This was wise. And you know, it's interesting that Jesus should use this kind of an illustration, because what was Jesus' trade? What did he do? He was a carpenter. Jesus built furniture, and he probably also was involved in building homes. So he understood something about home building and mortgages and subprime and all those kinds of things, you know. He got the whole construction deal. And so in his mind, as he's thinking about this illustration, he's like, I'm going to go with something that I know really well. And he's probably thinking about a region in southern Israel that's a very arid and dry region, and about a particular place where people would build their homes, a very real place. And so he talks about this one person who would build a home in this place, and they would go to this area, and there are a lot of riverbeds, dry riverbeds in this area, and it was a tempting place to build a house because you could oftentimes find really flat areas, and the soil was easy to dig into. And so they would go and they would construct a home in a riverbed. And it's likely that there hasn't been a lot of rain in a long time, so they haven't seen this riverbed full, but they know that it could, but they just forget about that. We're not thinking about that. We're thinking about today. And so they go to a spot, and they pick a nice flat spot, and then they test the soil. It's real sandy, so it's easy to get down into, and all they want to do is get a house built quickly and easily, and they want to be able to get their materials to it. And so the first spot, the easy spot, that's the one we're going to. So this is one builder that he's talking about. And so they build their house in the sand. And it's likely they don't dig a very good foundation. The footings don't go far into the dirt. And they start to live in. They think everything's great. And then the wintertime comes. And the rains are back this year. And they start filling up the streams. And then they start filling up the rivers. And then the riverbed that they're in becomes full. And it begins to flood. And as the streams rise and the storm comes and the wind beats against it, this house just goes, just falls down. Because we didn't build it in the right foundation, Jesus said. And he says, but there's this other guy who builds a home in the same probably riverbed, but he does something very different. He starts looking around. He doesn't just go to the first spot, the easiest spot, the flattest spot. He starts testing the soil and all the different places that they go. Even if it's a long way from where he's going to have to bring the material, he's not concerned about that. He's concerned about one thing. We need to find bedrock. I don't really care if it's flat or anything. We need bedrock. So he goes, and it takes him a long time, and then he finds it. And then he's going to have to dig way down, so it's going to take a lot more energy and a lot more effort. And he finds bedrock, and he sinks everything deep into that bedrock, builds this house. Winter comes, rains come, flood happens, winds beat against it. It washes all the sand away from around the rock, but you know what? The rock stays, and the house is fine. And Jesus says, now that's a wise builder, and the other one is a foolish builder. He says, so with that in mind, let's think about your life. What would you say your life is built on? Imagine him teaching this, you know? And he's kind of offering some guidance and some warning all at the same time. And he says, spiritually speaking, there is also a way that you can build a house for yourself, a life for yourself, that you can build it on sand and you can have a great crash, or you can build it on the rock and you can have something that will last for eternity. So we need to pay attention to whatever life we're building. So let's just take a minute and let's talk about, if we think about it in terms of our faith, what does it look like to have a faith that we build on sand? If this is something not good, then we need to know what this looks like. And I was thinking about this week, and I was like, all right, sand. Sand is just a compilation of a whole bunch of little what? Rocks. They're just a whole bunch of little rocks all brought together, and we might think, well, it's rocks. I mean, isn't that enough of a solid foundation? But they're just really little. And so you put together 1,000,000 little rocks, it doesn't mean you're going to have this solid foundation. So we look at these little rocks and we get fooled by that. And if you go back into the Sermon on the Mount, what did Jesus teach us about things to pay attention to? Well, one of them was faith in the law or religion to get you to heaven. So that might be something that we build our life on and think, well, if I just externally sort of kept the law and just did whatever the law said, but my heart wasn't in it, maybe I'll be okay. And we learn about things like handling anger or lust or marriage or commitments or forgiveness or money or stuff or worries. Remember all those things that he taught us about? And he's like, if we keep choosing to do this in the wrong direction, in other words, we just do it just to follow some religious path to check off the box. But in our heart, we don't love God and love people. That's a problem. We're building our life in sand, in this wrong place. And then we might say, well, what about faith in our own righteousness, our own goodness? Like, I'm a really good person. I do a lot of good things. I haven't killed anybody. We kind of have this minimum standard for goodness, and it's like maybe I'll get by with that. But I was thinking about this story that a preacher named Bill Hybels told. He's written lots of books and pastor of a big church up in Chicago, but he told this story once of being on an airplane with a guy, and they were sitting there, and they started having this conversation, and it sort of led into kind of a spiritual conversation, and they started talking about heaven, and the guy was not a believer, and he just said, you know what, I mean, I've lived a pretty good life. Like, I do lots of good things. I'm very charitable, and I love my wife, and give when I can, and all this kind of stuff. Never murdered anybody. I mean, come on, And Bill was like, well, that's pretty good. And they started having a debate about what gets you to heaven or not. And so Bill's like, all right, listen, let's do this. And so he took his napkin off the tray in front of him. He took his pen. And he said, let's just think about something. And he said, he put 10 up on the top, and he put 0 at the bottom, drew a line in between, and he wrote the word heaven out beside the 10. And he didn't write hell beside the 0, but that was the understanding there. And he's like, okay, so we got 0 to 10 here, kind of a goodness scale. Let's just call it that. And he goes, okay. So Bill goes, all right, who's the best person that you know? Who is like really good person? And he goes, Mother Teresa. He's like, Mother Teresa, there you go. She's amazing, right? She's done lots of good things. And Bill said, but you know what? I've heard Mother Teresa talk and heard her talk about her ministry and her life, and she is very humble, and she would say that what she does is such a small part of the overall goodness in the world, and she doesn't feel worthy, of the accolades that she gets for what she does and all this kind of stuff. And you know what? Mother Teresa would probably put herself at about a 7. And the guy was like, huh. And so then Bill said, let's think of somebody else. Who's another really good person? Billy Graham. Yeah, Billy Graham. Great preacher, lived an amazing life. He's led just thousands of people to the Lord. done lots of good things. So yeah, let's think about Billy Graham. So Bill says, I know Billy Graham, and I've actually heard him talk about Mother Teresa. And he said, I am not worthy to be compared to Mother Teresa. That woman is just amazing, what she has done, giving her life to ministering to the dying and the poor. And he's like, I would be nowhere near Mother Teresa. And so Bill was like, Billy Graham would put himself probably at about a 4. And so this guy's like, this is not going well. So then Bill's like, and I'm a preacher, led a big church. I've been a Christian for a long time. I feel like I've done lots of good things. I am not even in the ballpark as Billy Graham and Mother Teresa, and I'd put myself at like a 2, maybe like a 1.75. And so he hands the pen to the guy, and he goes, now, where would you put yourself on that scale with all your goodness? The guy was like, there's not really much room left. And Bill's like, exactly. You see, that's my point, is we think we're so good and like somehow all these good works are going to get us, we're just add them up to 10 and to heaven and all this kind of stuff. And he's like, you see, we can't do enough good works to get us to heaven. And the problem is the Bible says that we're supposed to be perfect. Like that's the standard for heaven is perfection. Would you say that you're a perfect person? Well, no. Okay, all right. See, we're missing the mark, aren't we, when it comes to being perfect and doing good things. And so Bill takes the pen and he draws a thick line, and then he draws a crossbar over it, and he goes, what does that look like? And he goes, a cross. And he goes, well, okay, let's talk about that cross. He said, do you know a guy named Jesus? And he goes, yeah, I know Jesus. And he goes, well, you know what? Jesus lived a perfect life, and he was a perfect sacrifice who died on what we call the cross. And because of his death and because he was perfect, you know what? Through him, we get to heaven. And you know what? There's no other way to do this. You see, through belief in him, we find eternity with God. And then out of our belief in him flow good works. But we have to get him first. That's how this whole thing works. And so he's just making the point. I love it so much. It's like, see, even your own righteousness won't get you there. We have to depend on somebody else to make that happen for us. So that would be a life built on sand if we were to do it that way. Or maybe even faith in our own, human ability, like I'm really smart, I'm really talented, I'm really gifted, or our ability to make a lot of money and have lots of things in our life. And we're kind of taught in our culture, to have all of those things and have the right bank account and insurance and annuities and all these things for the future. And that's a solid foundation for your life. And there's nothing wrong with those things. But if that's all you put your hopes and dreams in, that is a life built on a foundation of sand, Jesus would say. Or last of all, and this was a very hard one, but faith in a lukewarm, easy road Christianity. A faith that just kind of says, you know what, I want to have the world and I want to have Jesus too. I just want to have it both. I want 50% of God and I want 50% of the world to make me happy. Let me tell you something. God is not happy with 50%. He's not a 50%er. That equation does not work out for him, and he does not want to compete with anything in your heart. He just won't do it. He wants all of us. And so we can't build our life trying to have it all and expect that to go well. And so Jesus says, listen, why do you have to be careful with this? And he says, the rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a what? Great crash. Great crash. Not a little one. This thing fell apart. That's why you have to be careful. And we don't want to be fooled into thinking that we got it when all of a sudden everything comes. And so what is a flood and storms and stuff, what does that look like? Well, it might look like going to the doctor and getting the diagnosis of cancer and hearing 6 months. It might look like losing a family member that was completely unexpected and your heart is broken. It might look like complete financial ruin, losing your job, being relocated. See, that's a flood, isn't it? That's some serious wind. That's a storm. And when that comes, you will be tested. And what you believe in will be tested in that moment. And where you put your faith and what you put your trust in that moment, right there, it's going to be tested. That's what Jesus is trying to tell us. Now, it's interesting to me that Jesus calls the person who builds his house on the sand foolish. In fact, he calls him a fool. And you know what the Greek word for foolish or fool is? It's my beard. This happened earlier. Let me get this out of my beard. My no shave November. So anyway, the word in the Greek for foolish is moros. M-O-R-O-S. Do you know what that word means? It means dull in understanding, nonsensical, lacking a grip on reality, or acting as though brainless. And do you know that in the English we have another word for that same word, and that word sounds a lot like that word, and the word that we use in English in the same way is called, okay, that was weird. But anyway, moron. You know what Jesus is saying? The person who builds their life on the sand is a moron. Like, Jesus doesn't pull any punches. He just gives you the whole thing. He's like, you're a fool. Don't do it. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever to build your life, build your house on the sand. All right, but then he also talks about this whole notion of a faith built on the rock. You know, where we sink the timbers deep into the bedrock, and even though it may be a little harder and it may take more time and we have to do a little work to get that done, he's like, this is what will withstand the struggles and storms of the life that we're living. And so that kind of looks like this. That's a life that's built on a firm trust in God. Firm trust in God. That's like no matter what happens to me or what temptations come my way or what big ideas people have or the way I may be drawn over here or drawn over there, I will do nothing but trust the Lord for my life, for my future, for the decisions that I make. And you know, it was interesting while I was working on this sermon, an old hymn came back to me that I used to sing a lot growing up, and maybe some of you sang this too. Trust and obey. You remember that one? Who knows that hymn or grew up with it, that kind of thing? Yeah, ever since I was a little kid, I've heard this hymn. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. And I was thinking about those words, like, gosh, that's so simple yet so profound. That is exactly right. Trust and obey, for there's absolutely no other way to be happy in Jesus except that I trust and obey. And I just put my full weight on him. That's a life built on the rock. I think also that foundation includes having a proper view of self. Sometimes I think we just have this wrong view of ourselves. Maybe we kind of lift ourselves up a little higher than we should, or we literally think, and maybe even somebody here might think, that they are the center of everything. Like, center of the universe. Everything revolves around them. Poke that spouse right next to you. No, anyway. Sometimes we get stuck in that trap, and even if we don't say that to anybody else, or we wouldn't think that necessarily, if you look at our life, it kind of looks like everything revolves around us. So one of the things that we have to do is swallow our pride. Have you ever had to swallow your pride? That's a big lump sometimes for some people, man. It's like, I'm having a hard time getting that thing down. But you know what? We can't love God and have pride at the same time either. And the Bible says, pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. Sounds a lot like this parable that Jesus has given us. If you choose to build your life on your pride and think how great you are and how smart you are and how much you can do in this life, that's not going to work. That is a biblical noise. You know, it's like Jesus said that to his people. That won't work. But also just understanding that we were created in the image of God is important too. God has uniquely designed you, gifted you, and loves you. And wants you to do good things for him in this life and wants you to believe in him and have the best life possible. It's a good view of self, humbly serving him. A life that is also built on this word, as I've mentioned so many times. If we don't read this, if we don't know this, we can't hear God. And then we don't know what to do. So this is where we find out what God's will for us is and how to do what I'm talking about. And then kind of closely related to that is this whole idea of having a firm foundation that's built on hearing and doing. Jesus said, he said, listen, those who hear me, those who listen to me and do these things, that leads toward the right life built on the right foundation. You have to have hearing and doing at the same time. And man, how bad are we sometimes at hearing but just not doing? It's like, I've heard it, but I'm just not going to do it. So let me give you a ridiculous illustration. You know what? I have heard that vegetables are good for you. You've heard of these things? They come in different colors. They're like green or orange or yellow. We call them like broccoli, salad, you know. Pick a vegetable. And I've heard that these things are amazing, like they're really good for you, and in fact, you're supposed to have them to be healthy. I read it in the paper. CNN talked about it. I think I learned it growing up, that vegetables are amazing. But I struggle with vegetables, so I prayed about it. So God, help me with vegetables. Clearly, these are important things in my life, so help me deal with this vegetable thing. So I went and I ate a piece of broccoli, and then I never ate any more again. Now, that actually could be a true story for you. You know, it's like, hey, I tried asparagus, I ain't going back there again. But we know that vegetables are good for us to have all the right things and are part of the 4 basic food groups, and they're important to our life. And so if we don't do them, that's a problem for us, right? We will reap a consequence physically of not having vegetables in our life. And by the way, the gummies don't count. Gummies, those little gummies that you get your nutrients from, that ain't happening. That's a whole other issue. Or let me try this one on you, if that doesn't strike you. So you know when you go to the dentist and they're checking your teeth and they start talking about, you know, how things are going and all this kind of stuff. What's the number one thing that they tell you every single time that you're not doing enough of and that you should be doing better? What is that thing that they tell you? What is that? Flossing. I just went to the dentist. I had this experience. She starts the flossing and it's so hard. She's like, my gosh, have you ever flossed? Yes. And then she gets in there, I'm like, God, that hurts so bad. Then I'm bleeding, and she's like, yeah, and then pulling up steak and potato and, like, you know, candy and all these things are stuck down in there. And, okay, we got to talk about the flossing situation here, you know. And it's like, the flossing. And you go to the dentist, and you've heard this all your life, and they tell you should floss. It's important to your health of your teeth. And you see the chart on the wall, and you see these terrible brown, rotten teeth, you see the good teeth, and so many warnings about flossing. And we go away, and we go home, and we floss 2 times. We did it 2 times. I did twice. And I haven't done it again in a year, but I did it twice, you know. And so what's the problem with this? Why don't we eat more vegetables and floss regularly? Is because we just don't believe in it enough. We haven't given our heart to it. You know, we're not convicted by it. Okay, vegetables and floss to the side. What Jesus is talking about here is not just floss and vegetables, it's life and death. Hey, don't just hear these words. These life-giving, critical words and walk out of here and do nothing. That would be, in his words, foolish. That would be foolish. And if you go over to James in the New Testament, James 1, 22 to 24, by the way, James, the author of that book, is the brother of Jesus, so he knew a lot about Jesus' teaching. And in there he says this, do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves, but do what it says, right? Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in a mirror and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. That is the most ridiculous thing. You know, I look at myself, like, oh, there I am, you know, and I walk over. What do I look like? Oh, yeah. It's a ridiculous point that he's making because it's ridiculous when we read this and we walk away and we don't change our life and measure our life against it. You see? Okay? Hearing and not doing is kind of a dangerous thing. All right, so a couple of things that Jesus is doing here overall in these last few verses. One is he's trying to give us a warning. You know, he's trying to give us a warning. Sometimes we just need to have a warning, don't we? It's like we're driving down the road and there's this sign and it says, warning, bridge out. We have a choice to make at that moment, don't we? Up, stop, turn around, or that's not true. Right into the river. And Jesus standing there going, yeah. I'm not surprised. You know, there was a warning right here that you actually looked at. And that's kind of what Jesus is doing here. He's like, here is a warning. It's like the warning label for you. Oh, by the way, I'm running low on time, but I just have to share this with you. I found this little list of warning labels. It's so funny. Get this. These are actual, real warning labels put on consumer products that you buy. On a Duraflame fireplace log, you know what I'm talking about, those kind that you use to get your fire started? The warning on there says, caution, risk of fire. On a Batman costume that you would wear at Halloween, the warning is, cape does not enable user to fly. On a bottle of hair coloring, this is so good, do not use as an ice cream topping. On a cardboard sun shield for your car, do not drive with sun shield in place. Just don't do it. Don't even try it. On a portable stroller that you stroll your child in, caution, remove infant before folding for storage. Do you know why these warning labels are actually on these products? Do you know why? Why? You're way ahead of me. Because all of these things have been done. And how was that ice cream, by the way? You know? What color did your mouth become for years after that? You know, it's like, oh, I got this burnt amber color in my mouth. It was so good. You know, it's like, so good. So good. Well, anyway. Warnings. Yes, that's what we're talking. Warning labels. This is Jesus' warning label. Be careful with what you're doing with your life. Pay attention. And you know what? There's a truth in here that we all need to understand. That Jesus says, he said, the rains, storms, the wind, it will come. In both cases, each person experienced the storm. And you know what the Bible says about you and I? Doesn't matter whether you're a believer or not a believer or whatever. The rain falls on the just and the unjust. You know what that means? The rain's going to fall. The rain will fall. At some point, we will experience difficulty in this life. A storm will come. And the true test of what happens to this house that we built, this life that we built, is how we dealt with that foundation. What did we build our life on? What do we believe in? Who are we trusting in? And at the very end of all of this, Matthew finishes out this passage in 28 and 29, and he says, when Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, because he had taught as one who had authority and not as the teachers of the law. And you see, Jesus was not only teaching in an authoritative way, Jesus was the authority. You see, Jesus is the authority. If you ever wonder what the truth of life is, if you ever wonder which way to go, what am I doing? Jesus, every single time. He's the authority in this life. And the question for us is, are we following him? To wrap up this whole Sermon on the Mount, will we follow him? Will he be the first thing? Will he be the only thing? So let's pray. Well, God, we thank you so much for the truth that has been laid out here once again, a reminder of how important it is that we handle our life and how we handle our decisions and how we handle our money and our relationships and our mind and our heart. All of these things matter. We thank you for the warning to be careful of what the foundation is that we've laid in our life and what are we really trusting in. And God, we're reminded that there's so many things in this world that can distract us and deceive us and make us think that we're building on the rock, but we're really not. So Lord, help us not to be deceived, but to read this word for what it is and to trust it and trust you. To realize that the only rock in this life on which we can build a life that will last and a house that will stand firm in the midst of struggle and crisis is the one built on you. So God, I'm just praying for all of us in here, that we would have the courage, the self-discipline, the will to make this a reality for us every day. To put first things first, and the first thing is you. And to not confuse that with anything else. And Lord, we learned in this Sermon on the Mount that when we put you first, everything else just lines up. Our marriage, how we deal with our kids, how we deal with our relationships, work, all those kinds of things, our future, money. So God, I'm praying that we would find that place where you exist first in our life, that we would live by that. And God, we're very thankful, and as we move into this season of Thanksgiving, we're just very thankful that you loved us first and that you saw our great need and you knew that our good works would never get us to you, and that you sent your only Son, Jesus Christ, to die on a cross for us, and that through his good work, the perfect work, we find a relationship with you. Now we find hope and help. And I pray that everybody in here has come to that place, that resolve where they've said, God, I give you my life and I believe in Jesus and I want to put him first in my life. And we know, Lord, that that's a narrow path, but that's a right path. God, I pray that you would give us the resolve to stay on the path and to love you well with everything that we do. So God, this morning, we look around our life and we're so grateful for who you are and for what you mean to us, for the ways that you've reached out to us and loved us and provided for us. And we just say today, we love you and we thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.